Welcome to the Weekly Norm, everybody. You know, when I was in chiropractic school, I was eating a plant-based diet, in fact, mostly raw, and lots of juices and things like that. My hands and feet were always cold, and that's not the best thing to have when you're a chiropractor and working on people. So I was a little concerned about that, so I started eating more cooked foods and heavier foods, and sure enough, my metabolism picked up and my hands and feet warmed up a little bit, but it was always a bit of a problem for me. And then in the early 90s, as I've talked about, I started doing this breathing work for various reasons that I've talked about as well, where I started to breathe more and more slowly. I wasn't even trying to breathe more slowly. I was just trying to get the breath to have a sense of moving in the right way, but it was slowly gravitating towards slower and slower. And I had a lot of positive things from this, but one of the things I started to get was my feet during this practice would get really warm, and then my hands would start to get warm, and I'm thinking, I'm breathing slower. I haven't even eaten for a long time. I'm breathing slower and slower. I can't be increasing my metabolism here, and yet my hands and feet were getting very warm, deliciously warm, not pathologically in any sense. So this has to do with CO2 tolerance, not intolerance, which we talked about last week. CO2 tolerance refers to the body's ability to handle elevated levels of CO2 in our blood, carbon dioxide in our blood, without feeling anxious, without feeling panicky, without feeling a strong, overwhelming urge to take a breath in. Because when CO2 builds up in the blood, and it's a healthy thing, it reacts by increasing the urge to breathe. The more our chemoreceptors are trained to tolerate that CO2, the longer we can go and the slower we can go with our breathing. Because if your CO2 tolerance is low, as we talked about last week, this urge kicks in much more quickly and strongly. In other words, you can be breathing slowly, and I can say, hold your breath, and very quickly you'll find that you need to take a breath in. Whereas if you are more CO2 tolerant, you could go for a long period of time, even at the end of an exhalation, before you have to take your breath in. Now, that is what's called CO2 tolerance. We can go longer and longer and longer. You can build that up in a number of ways. You can build it up athletically, like with strong cardiovascular work, the Wim Hof method, the breath of fire techniques, where they go deep diving and trying to hold your breath as long as you can. These are all ways to build up CO2 tolerance, but they are stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. So it's a different level of having CO2 tolerance. And you can be very fit, CO2-wise, athletically, and then sit down and be quiet and all of a sudden have strong CO2 intolerance, because all of a sudden we're cultivating the parasympathetic nervous system with that CO2 tolerance. Why this matters is high CO2 tolerance can help with better endurance and stamina, reduced anxiety and panic under stress, improved breath control and performance control, whether it's just talking in front of a group of people or being in theater, or whether it's just trying to be in the world. And you can cultivate that. You cultivate it very much like getting in shape when you cultivate it the way we do it, going slowly and with breath holds. And it's getting in shape for our respiratory system and for our nervous system. When we're doing it quietly, it's not necessarily building our muscles, but it really cultivates that, and it cultivates the mind as well. It's really a cool thing. Quiet, slow breathing increases CO2 in the blood. And the slower we go, the higher the CO2 goes. And if we're intolerant to it, then the faster we have to breathe to compensate for that. So we have to train our nervous system to breathe slowly. And I would encourage you to assume that you're never breathing as slowly as you can. I'm still cultivating slower and slower breath. And we increase that comfort for CO2 and we decrease that panic. And another thing is we increase that calm focus. Breath holds, as well as breathing slowly, creates a controlled CO2 spike. It builds up the CO2 while we're holding our breath. And it shifts, like the slow breathing does, the chemoreceptor sensitivity. So it doesn't trigger that I need to breathe reflex as early. It's like building up a calm, flexible nervous system through our breathing. And it is so powerful. And we're going to get more and more into working with sustained pauses, working with elongated breathings. These are all things that cultivate the parasympathetic side of the quiet athlete, of the quiet mind, of the calm mind. So thanks so much for listening.